Hello and welcome to episode 23 of Can We Still Be Friends, the podcast that tests the limits of the friendship between two people who mistake movie taste for personal morality. I'm Nate Goss, here with Ryan Ebling. For this episode, we welcome Erick Fortmann. Welcome, Erick.
Hi, thank you.
Erick is here to help us discuss Grey Gardens, the landmark documentary from 1975, directed by the Maysles brothers. We chose this movie in memory of Albert Maysles, who passed away on March 5th this year. It's also a very important movie that I've only watched recently, Ryan has only seen part of, and Erick loves.
Grey Gardens has had a broad impact, though at the time there wasn't really a box office take to speak of. It has won a handful of awards, though many of those awards were given years later. Its biggest impact is in its cult status, inspiring entire fashion lines, a musical, and an HBO movie, among other things. The Maysles themselves have had a major impact, moving the documentary beyond purely informative and into a form of entertainment and exploration.
But has its impact reached beyond its quality? Does Grey Gardens stand up on its own?
Or are its best years behind it, and it's been living out its days in a secluded beach house, unaware of the way the world has moved on without it? Keep on listening.
This is the best thing to wear for the day, you understand? Yeah. Because I don't like women in skirts. And the best thing is to wear pantyhose or some pants under a short skirt, I think. Then you have the pants under the skirt. And then you can pull the stockings up over the pants underneath the skirt. Mm-hmm. And you can always take off the skirt and use it as a cape. So I think this is the best costume for the day.
Okay.
I have to think these things up, you know.
All right, that was a clip from the movie that we're discussing today, Grey Gardens. That was Little Edie Bouvier Beales, describing one of her many, many eccentric outfits.
Costumes,
yes.
That was the revolutionary costume.
Was it?
Yes.
I didn't know it had a name.
Because she would get in trouble wearing it in East Hampton.
Oh.
So she tells them, and she didn't want to shock.
See, this is why I'm glad
the
you're
gardener.
here.
Oh, that's right. She didn't want to shock Brooks. Yeah, scandalize.
Yeah. So as we mentioned in our intro, or at least alluded to, we are doing Grey Gardens because Albert Maysles, one of the directors of Grey Gardens, along with his brother David Maysles, passed away March 5th. The Maysles brothers, as filmmakers, are kind of
fathers of documentary film as we know it.
Both the Maysles, they were real movers and shakers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how Grey Gardens, came about.
Yeah.
I don't know much actually about how Grey Gardens came about.
That was one of my questions was how they picked them as subjects. And is that something we want to talk about now, or do we want to talk about that later?
Why don't we come back to that? Definitely. But why don't we go ahead and maybe do, what we do in all of our podcast episodes, where we basically talk about our experience with Grey Gardens before watching it for this episode. Ryan, you had really not even seen it
no,
fully,
I had
at
seen
least.
part of it, and it's one of those movies that you just always have to see. If you haven't seen it yet, the emphasis is on yet, because there's some point in your life where you should see Grey Gardens.
Right.
And you'll hear references to it.
Yeah, definitely. There are a lot of references to Grey Gardens. And so it's one that I'd always wanted to see, and was aware of, but hadn't ever seen all the way through. But you've seen it.
I actually had just seen it recently. I decided to watch it because I kind of made this New Year's resolution this year that I was going to watch one Criterion film every week for the year 2015. And I just was looking through my Hulu Plus account and I saw it there. And I actually, Erick, because we've been friends for a little while, I knew that it was one of your all-time favorites. And I heard you talking about it a lot every once in a while. And I just decided now was the time I was going to watch it. This was probably about a month or so ago. And
we talked about it at work. I saw you.
We did, yeah. About the next day or so, I told you I had finally seen it, and I think I told you my feeling was that I was pretty confused about how I felt about it. Like I didn't know what to think of it, and one thing we've been doing for our last 2 episodes is we've been kind of bringing in our star ratings that we put in our Letterboxd account, which is a place where you can rate your movies, and they have a 5-star rating system. And after I had watched it that first time, I had given it a 3.5-star rating because I felt like I had seen something, like I liked it. I don't know why I liked it. And I remember I wrote as a note to the star rating that I wasn't ashamed to admit that I was confused by this movie.
Yeah.
And so that was my feeling before going into this rewatch. Eric, what about you? What was your? I mean, obviously you've had a lot of experience with this movie. It's one of your favorites.
The first time I saw it, I was probably maybe 16, 17. And I watched it because, there's always sort of pop culture references to it. And I'm a big admirer of the Kennedy family. And, the Bouviers were Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis's family. This is her aunt and her first cousin. They were pretty close relatives. So I thought it was at Cook Library, and they had the VHS, and I took it home one day, and I was very confused. And if I had Letterboxd then, I would have given it a 3 stars because, it was far out.
Yeah,
and
to say the least.
And then I always say this movie takes a lot of rewatchings throughout your life. And each time you watch it, I know both the Maysles thought this movie was sort of like a Rorschach test to test your boundaries and your limitations of how you feel about life. And
it's very interesting.
Yeah.
But what was it that made you decide to revisit it? Because I think if I had,
it haunted me. I mean, even the first time you see it,
I think
even if you have a visceral reaction to it, it'll haunt you forever. I mean,
you feel like you just gotta
see it again.
I mean, that first time, it's not necessarily an enjoyable experience.
Right.
And you're right. Haunting is a very good word. The voices, I don't know. Yeah.
And I think too, like when you rewatch it, you often hear the sound of the ocean outside the house. And to me, watching it repeatedly, you kind of go into that flow and ebb of the movie, of their lives.
Yeah.
And there's almost, even with like all the screaming and the singing and the carrying on, there's a very quiet part of the movie.
There is, yeah.
That I think that's the haunting part.
How many times did you have to watch it before you eventually came to the point where it became one of your favorites?
I would probably
or how did that
say,
happen? Can you explain?
Like I just like I carried it with me, and then people would talk about it, and then you think, oh, yeah, those crazy women, and then I really can't remember what viewing it was, and I thought, I don't know, maybe what was going on in my life at the time, but the movie to me is like you have to trust the vulnerability of being yourself. And that's, I think, one of the most beautiful things in life. And I think that's what these two women did. And I think once I understood that, then it was like I watched it again for the first time. And it was really...
It was like a whole new experience at that point.
The most beautiful movie I've ever seen.
Wow. And no exaggeration there.
No, none.
Absolutely
none.
Wow. Well, okay, now that we've heard that, after hearing that, Ryan, would you like to maybe share, since this is your first time seeing it, what's that rating going to be on Letterboxd?
I mean, interestingly enough,
we'll get into why.
My rating. I was thinking about it on the way over here. I didn't do it because I was going to wait until after the episode to actually rate it. But I would have rated it a 3.5. We've
been on the same page every time so far.
Yeah, our premise isn't really holding up, but just because the exact same thing. I saw something important, but I don't know how to process it yet.
Yeah.
And I'm very much looking forward to hearing what Eric has to say because the conversation would
be... It's the first time I've heard that in a long
time. But I feel like Nate and I would maybe come to some conclusions, but it would be very much like, oh, I guess maybe...
We're still kind of in that adolescent phase of Grey Gardens.
I guess so. We need somebody who's, I don't know, walked the path a little bit more.
A little Beale wisdom.
Right. But it's because I feel like the women can be perceived so many different ways. They can be fascinating, or they can be pitiful, or they can be funny, or they can be sad, or they can be intimidating, or they could be delusional. Just all these different ways that you could look at them. And I think it says a lot about the viewer, or like you said, your stage in life. Watching it in high school, I have no idea what I would have expected, how I would have perceived it.
Right.
So yeah, it'll be interesting to unravel it a little bit.
Right. Rewatching it for this episode, I'm already I'll say I'll bump it up from it was 3.5 when I watched it, and this was only a few weeks ago. But watching it already again, I'm already kind of bumping it up to probably about a 4-star rating at this point. That I did actually like it more this time around than the last time I watched it.
But that's good to know that on even a very close repeat viewing, it already moved up for you.
So we should start, I guess, talking about the movie a little bit more in depth, maybe.
I guess so. Well, can we start with how the movie maybe got made a little bit? Because that was a question I had for a long time, was how did they pick the Beales as subjects, and how did they end up filming them so closely? And Eric, it seems like you know some of that history.
Yeah. So the movie came about, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis' sister, his name is Lee Razzedval, and she's still living. She was dating a photographer named Peter Beard, who was a real playboy, and they would hang out in the Hamptons and they would rock, and they hung out with the Stones, and Lee Razzedval became good friends with the Maysles, who were very good friends with Peter Beard, and she wanted to make a movie about her childhood. She had a lot of nostalgia, she said, about her childhood in the Hamptons in New York, and her boyfriend Peter Beard said the Maysles would be the perfect people to do it. So they started to film scenes with her walking on the beach, kind of nothing really interesting. And then she said, I think you should meet my aunt and my cousin. And at the time, they had actually, I think, had already been rated. They
like the newspaper headline.
Correct. At the beginning of the
so they weren't completely unknown maybe to the Maysles of the world.
So I'm not sure if that happened before or after that Lee brought the Maysles to meet the Beales. And they said once they did, they filmed them for, maybe 2 hours, and they said, this is a movie.
This is it, yeah.
And once Lee Razzedval saw the footage of the Beales, she said, the movie is over. I am not doing this. You will not embarrass me. You will not embarrass my sister.
Oh, so she did not want this to happen.
So they waited, I guess, maybe about a year, and the Maysles kept in touch with the Beales. And at this time, I think the house had been cleaned up, and which was paid for by Jackie Kennedy.
Yeah.
And
you see that in the beginning that she took part.
And she supported them financially.
Oh, okay. I wondered how they sustained.
And
that was the other question I had. Yeah.
And Little Edie's life too, after her mother's death. So they came and they said, we want to make this movie, and the two of them, as you know in the film, they are
like the spotlight.
Yeah, and I think they only filmed for about 6 weeks.
Wow.
And
I remember I watched some special features on the DVD that I watched, and they had said that unlike a lot of documentaries at the time, which would bring in maybe at least 4 additional crew members, this was just the two brothers,
right? Lugging around those huge cameras,
Yep.
And I think their editing team were 2 women, I think, and they didn't meet the Beales during the actual filming, but they edited the movie, and so they definitely felt a connection to them, and very, very close to them.
And did those women get directing credits as well?
They did.
Okay.
And I guess that was something that the Maysles did a lot. And one of the women, I think her name's Muffy, she, when she first met Little Edie, she just burst into tears because this was someone she's known for years and she hadn't really met, but she had met. And that's
she knew so
how we
well
all feel watching the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I think even on the first watch of this movie, you feel like these people, and they're definitely giving a lot of themselves in this movie. And
nothing was scripted. They said repeatedly, people asked them, "Did you tell them to say these things?" And they said no, because they would come to the house and they would have to spray themselves for fleas, and they'd put flea collars around their ankles because the garbage and the bugs and everything in the house were so awful.
Yeah,
and they would hear them, the same conversations, the same songs outside the house before they went in, and it was their world.
Well, and that's interesting what you say about how you feel like you know them, because that's, I think, for me, one of the unsettling things, because they give the backstory, which is not a flattering backstory, when they show the newspaper headlines of the house being raided and then being forced to be cleaned up, which is a fairly undignified.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially when you've got Jackie Kennedy coming in to do it for you.
Depicted almost the way it was with Princess Di going to third world countries and like that sort of thing. Like it was very much like look at this humanitarian effort Jackie is putting into these relatives.
Right.
You meet them in a very undignified state without knowing anything
that's
but
true.
that.
Mm-hmm.
And then their history is unfolded slowly through their stories, not even through the same sort of headlines or any verifiable facts. So it's unsettling because you find out these fairly embarrassing intimate details of these women, and you see them in very revealing clothing, but like not in any way that's provocative, in a way that you're sort of, I don't know, Big Edie hoping she'll cover up a little bit more. Not in any way, but for her sake, more, and it's an odd thing to see someone so vulnerable, and that's all you know of them is there's this vulnerability. And then even more odd that they aren't embarrassed by it. And I think that's
I think that's what's so beautiful
Yeah.
about the movie is that
I can see
that's
that.
their strength. They're not ashamed in any way, shape, or form by how they live. Because too, both of them, I mean, they're to the manner born, and even living, Big Edie naked in that bed, with the cats and the pizza boxes. She was, she was it.
Yeah. And I can see that coming on repeat viewings, but with this first viewing, it's just something that you don't process. You don't meet people that way. So their lack of shame in it is, I don't know, it's unnerving.
And it's a bit of first. It almost felt like a provocation in a way, like almost like it forced me to almost evaluate how I size up everyone.
Well,
when
exactly.
I meet them.
I mean, that's the test.
Like it's provoking you to say, like, what do you think of these people?
Yeah.
And, are you supposed to think that way about these people? How do you interpret people when you meet them? How do you size them up? How do you write them off? Or how do you embrace them? And even on a second viewing, I'm still a bit just unsettled by it, in a good way. I think it's actually in that way, it's almost like it's a good process for everyone to go through because it's a challenging thing that you have to come out the other side and maybe even see a few things in yourself.
Well, I was just going to say,
absolutely.
What you're asking yourself really, when you're so uncomfortable seeing this, is like, what is it about yourself that's you find uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Because we all will see ourselves, what we might want to be or what we won't want to be in these two women in this house.
Mother's giving her all this SHIT, so I went and told some things about the family. But you see, in dealing with me, the relatives didn't know that they were dealing with a staunch character. And I tell you, if there's anything worse than a staunch woman, STAUNCH. There's nothing worse, I'm telling you. They don't weaken, no matter what.
Fears we might have of how our life might end up. Or broken hopes and disappointments to ourselves.
It's exactly what I even wrote that down in my notes where I said basically Grey Gardens pinpoints the two ways in which I will often look at my own life's aspirations through two very different looking glasses. I feel like the Maysles as filmmakers make American films. Before watching Grey Gardens, I watched Salesman and Gimme Shelter. And in a very subtle and brilliant way, they often challenge America's ideals, whether it's the more pragmatic ideals like individual choice, capitalism, the American dream, or whether it's the more romantic ideals of like freedom, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, all that kind of stuff. Salesman, which was the Bible Salesman documentary, was much more of a critique of that pragmatic approach. Like it's a devastating look at the American dream and how it dupes the middle class. Gimme Shelter was almost on the other side. Like it was a critique of that more romantic ideal of America, which is equally devastating to look at in Gimme Shelter, which is basically this counterculture's bohemian interpretation of freedom. And both films leave you unsettled. And then you've got Grey Gardens, which kind of gives you both simultaneously in the Beales. I don't know whether to think that the Beales are nonconformist idols, role models of staunch individualism, unapologetically expressing themselves, or the other side of me, the other way I look through the looking glass with everything that I think about as far as my own life is Are they non-participants, reclusive, still spoiled from an aristocratic inheritance with the luxury to live, even if it's in filth, sedentary, self-absorbed lives that naturally come from a life without work? It's the two dueling halves of my own self when I'm watching this,
Yeah, I totally follow you, and I think you're absolutely right, and I think that divide is represented by Big Edie and like Little Edie. I don't think that they represent the same things. You've almost got pre-war in Big Edie and post-war in Little Edie, but the pre-war domination of Big Edie is keeping Little Edie from breaking free.
She made me leave the Barbizon.
Oh, that was... Well, I thought you'd been in New York long enough. You were getting lines in your face.
I didn't want to leave. I was getting my big chance.
Oh, no, you were not. That married man was not going to give you any chance at all. You were not.
52, I was going to get it.
Well, you didn't get it. You missed out.
I was just getting up what you call
now,
a
listen, you're wasting that thing on this because it's just nuts.
When she said I had to come
well, I
home.
thought you should come home.
Well,
There's a lot about what is a woman in Little Edie. She's just like 15 years too early, because if she had had that sort of freedom with her clothing, with her mentality, she would have been a revolutionary. But as it was, she was a societal failure and ended up not being able to flourish because she didn't have a trained voice, and she didn't have the right husband, and she was too young for one and too old for another. And it ended up kind of just keeping her sedentary. And that to me is one of the things that makes me sad about this movie, is that Little Edie is such a, I don't want to use the word victim because I don't want to sound like I think she's weak, because she's not. But
maybe she's more a prisoner.
Yeah, that's a much better word for it. And that she, part of that aristocratic life, which some might say spoiled her, also kept her, quote, in line, unable to break free from her mother, and some of those other things that really were keeping her from reaching her potential.
Well, I think that's a bond between both of them, was that the society which they lived, imposed regulations and rules, that they both broke. To what degree and what price they paid, right. We'll be talking about every time people watch this movie.
Yeah.
Big Edie got married, like she was supposed to, but she wanted her singing career, and she chose that over her marriage, and she stayed in this decaying house for 50 years. Her daughter didn't want to get married to a banker, a stockbroker in this WASP white bread world, and so they, lived with their choice.
Yeah.
Well, and I kind of feel like all of these questions that we bring up, the reason that they work is because the Maysles don't answer it for you at all.
Right.
Yeah.
But I remember also watching an interview with Albert Maysles where he talked about how much they actually grew to love and care for these two women.
And it's very obvious.
You can see it. I think it really does come through in the movie.
And in the editing, too. You can see what they chose to put, that Jerry isn't some he could have been portrayed very differently,
right?
As somebody from the outside who's sort of doing them a favor, but really he's somebody who's doesn't understand them.
Yeah, well, Jerry's very presence just seems funny to me. I just laugh when I see Jerry on the screen. What's this guy doing there? I don't know.
How old is he?
He seems really young.
Yeah. Well, the more I watch the movie, the more I see it. Maybe they edited him as. Both the Edies were using Jerry to argue with each other.
Well, you do. A beautiful face, like a girl. You look like my mother. Absolute image of my mother, Jerry. Jerry, you're not going to drink anything, are you?
No.
What are you going to have?
I'll wait for the chicken.
You're waiting for the chicken? You mean to say you're not going to have soup or a drink or highball or something like that? You think we better have some rum? Oh, no, she didn't put any papers on that thing today. I asked her to. Jerry, I'm badly treated all along.
I think my days at Grey Gardens are limited.
To using, especially Big Edie, she's flirting with him like she's,
Got a
still-
chance.
yeah, right. And that,
Maybe she does. I don't know.
I think little Edie, was jealous of his friendship with, her mother. And then when she's talking about the men who've lived in the house, I think it was really interesting to bring that dynamic into the house to show that they weren't just these secluded recluses, that there was some contact with the outside world, this tug of war with Jerry in the middle.
I think at the very least, Jerry does play that part of showing that there were people who were in the house once in a while. Like they weren't completely isolated to themselves.
But they do also, the Maysles do highlight their isolation as well by the food drop-off occurring without any, he doesn't knock on the door and deliver the food, he just drops it off. And then there are several shots of just like through the bushes, you see a biker or a car driving by. It reinforced for me that separation of the reality they've created for themselves apart from the reality of the world.
A few years ago, they released the Beales of Grey Gardens with, again, amazing footage. And a lot of it has Jerry in it and Lois in it. She's in the birthday party scene.
Sure.
And you really see them as participating more in the real world, even though these people are quite eccentric themselves. But, it's interesting to see them more as an interactive group with other people.
In Grey Gardens, you get the sense that they haven't stepped off the property in however long.
So I read somewhere that Big Edie hadn't left the house since 1968. And Little Edie, except to go to the beach and to church, hadn't left the house since like 1970.
Oh, so
since
they
the raid. No.
Stepped off the property.
No.
Okay. But they still interacted with
They
people.
had visitors
people came to them.
Yeah. Although in Grey Gardens, and I haven't seen Beales of Grey Gardens, but I got the sense when you said, I didn't know her name, Lois is her name. So she just seemed very uncomfortable the entire time.
But I think...
is that an editing choice, do you think?
I think that was an editing choice. Because Lois, her mother was Mrs. Beales' best friend. And when her mother died, she actually lived at Grey Gardens. And she wrote a book. She lived there for maybe like a year.
Okay.
And it's an interesting book, and she's kind of just as nuts as they are.
Lois is?
Yeah.
Interesting.
She's still living.
I did
She's
not
in her
get that
90s.
sense.
I got the sense that
She's a palm reader.
almost as a oh, really? See,
Yeah.
she seemed
And she
to
would
me
paint
like
she
these,
seemed
all
like
those
somebody-
paintings in the
yeah.
house she did.
Really?
Yeah, and she would paint like these portraits of like Little Edie coming out of like the sea.
Huh.
And
That is not the sense I got
my
at
sense
all watching Grey
completely was
Gardens.
that she was someone who was just completely uncomfortable, like almost like she hadn't been there for a
Right,
long
yeah.
time.
Yeah,
It
and she was
like,
just there as a service to them. But so maybe the personality was just her personality. It wasn't
I think that's
discomfort
true.
at all.
Yeah,
She's just an
I think
odd
she's just
person.
kind of, she goes with the flow.
So I felt like on this time around, I think the first time around I was definitely picking up on things that just made me uncomfortable about the way they live. Yeah. And this time around I decided to kind of make a conscious effort to see how they live that I kind of admire or that I kind of wish I could do more of, or, I kind of sought that out this time. And I don't know if you guys want to speak to that at all, but for me, it seemed interesting, and this could also be an editing choice as well, but they were living in the 70s, so it wasn't a totally there were things like television around, but interestingly, they kind of stick to the radio.
Yeah.
And for all their quirks, there is something kind of beautiful about them just being in a house and singing and dancing together and just like reminiscing. And I think sometimes they're doing it for the camera. Actually, a lot of times I think they're doing it for the camera. But
I admire your positive outlook on that.
It's a positive outlook that's also coupled by my first viewing of it.
Right,
but,
because a lot of their singing and dancing, which, like you said, may have been for the camera, was also so competitive with one another. And Little Edie's singing and dancing especially was so often met with violent criticism and sometimes cruel criticism as I perceived it. And the reminiscing is also very much sort of sad, living in the past. And I'm all for reminiscing if it isn't a way of escaping the reality of current life, or, it just doesn't seem as healthy as perhaps were
no, I think you're
saying
right.
it was.
I mean, yeah. And and what's also kind of disturbing about what you're saying with the relationship between Big Edie and Little Edie is that Big Edie will critique her as she's doing all of this, and then as soon as she leaves the room, she can tell David and Albert that she's got a better voice than I ever did when I was an agent.
It just seems so sad that there's something about Big Edie. I don't know what it is, but I've seen it in other people where you can't praise someone, especially a child or a close friend or someone who shouldn't be in competition with you, but you feel for some reason they are.
Well, too, I mean, I think, we have to understand, too, when we're watching this movie, these two women spend every single day together, every single minute. And I mean, think about the closest people in your life. There's codependency.
Yeah.
And, when you throw in living a life of complete fantasy, there's definitely going to be, trying to get their goat. They make up, they fight, they sing, they fight, they make up. That was their life.
Yeah.
Nothing ever changed.
Yeah.
And you can see in the cycles of the movie, their arguments, they're getting along. Like, nothing is ever going to change for these women.
Yeah, and I can appreciate it for sort of, making that statement as the film itself, like it doesn't wrap a bow on this at all or even give you an epilogue or anything about what.
Because I think I remember the first time I watched it, like you kind of think, well, is Edie going to leave?
Right.
Like, is she going to leave?
Is that what it's building towards?
Right.
And no, it's going to be this constant, misinterpretation between the two of them. Why did she stay with her mother? Did her mother make her stay, or did she come back of her own free will?
Yeah,
can Edie just get up and leave? She's a grown woman.
It's another thing about the movie that is difficult to figure out. Is it admirable that she's there taking care of her mother despite the fact that her mother makes her life so difficult, or is it a little bit sad that she is so sort of lost without that life, that she can't leave, that if she left, where would she go? And the movie doesn't tell us whether it's admirable or sad. It makes it very unclear.
I know.
And I think that's very frustrating to a lot of people. And also, honestly, doesn't really make you want to go watch it again right away.
No. In fact, when we decided we were going to do this episode,
I
was like,
I don't know if I want to watch it again.
Fine, I'll watch it again.
I can see myself in a few years, maybe not even that long, but in a while, after being haunted by it and mulling it over, wanting to go back and maybe, for lack of a better phrase, see what all the fuss is about again,
Well, I remember actually, I was watching some videos of, they actually had two fashion designers on the Criterion special features, John Bartlett and Todd Oldham. And they both talked about their first time watching it and not getting what all the fuss was about. But they were both talking about it, how much it's meant to them, even in a professional way, how much Grey Gardens has meant to them. So it obviously grew in their estimation. But we have the luxury now with Blu-ray and DVD where if we want to watch it again, we'll just get it and we'll watch it. There is a Criterion edition of this. But I'm trying to figure out how this thing got so much momentum in a day where it probably didn't even get a wide theatrical release.
Right.
You'd have to really seek it out. I mean, John Bartlett said it was basically kind of, it became this legend in New York where it was kind of like Deep Throat.
Right.
Like it was something everyone talked about, but few had actually seen. And that he actually got this VHS copy that was like the worst transfer, like some of the audio even cut out, and it just was like an awful transfer. And then watching that transfer and staying like, what is this? What? I don't get it. I just don't get it. But there is something that does bring you back to it. And I can even speak as someone who was, because of this episode, kind of forced to rewatch it. I wasn't looking forward to rewatching it, but I will say that as soon as I hit play, I was like, okay, I kind of actually was immediately pulled in and said, okay, I think there's something I'm going to get out of this that I didn't get the first time. I could feel it within the first 5 minutes of watching it. As soon as I even heard the voices, I was like, oh yeah.
Because there's like that quiet.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Magic about that. It's like stepping into water or something. I don't know. And, yeah.
That must be something that comes through on repeat viewings, because to me it felt so chaotic, and that even moments that should be quiet, where little Edie is cleaning up her room or whatever, Big Edie's still Like that constant.
It's like a looming presence almost.
And that sort of scene makes me, makes Little Edie sort of the main character of the movie. Is that you there's a lot of sympathy for the fact that she can't escape Big Edie's influence. Even if Big Edie were to die, Little Edie would not be free of anything, really. And just that constant, you can't make out what she's saying, but she's always there. So for me, I have a very hard time finding positives in Big Edie especially.
Well, I would actually be curious, because I feel like when I hear people who love this movie, they almost exclusively talk about Little Edie.
Yeah.
And as someone who like loves this movie and has seen it a lot, I don't know if, Eric, have you found something in Big Edie that is in itself also like just as beautiful or just as redeemable? Or
Yeah, I do. I think, she was definitely the dominant partner in the marriage. I mean, there's all different kinds of marriages.
Right.
And I think that certainly she was, manipulative. But the beauty of, I think, the prison that she created for herself and for her daughter, I mean, that's why we're still talking about it right now. And, her expression of her singing, it goes back to, her missed chances of her life, but it's also her way of expressing her love for her daughter. And, again, it's the most codependent relationship I think maybe ever put on film.
Yeah.
Besides Psycho, maybe.
Yeah. Which is not a picture of a healthy
right. But
child.
I mean, no, definitely one finds, Little Edie, the beauty of the movie, but maybe we think that now because we're still young. Maybe when we're older, I don't know. You know what I mean? Maybe we could relate to Big Edie's choices and her approach to things, even if maybe it's not us, but we can see where she's coming from when we're older.
Yeah, even though I don't have kids, I have recognized, and as a teacher, in a way, I've recognized similar things, that nobody writes the book for you.
Right.
That you make your own choices, that you do the best you can. And if there is something that I see positive in Big Edie, is that she is not spending her time second guessing the choices she made.
No, not at all.
So her singing throughout the movie, talking about her husband when she had the chance sort of to divorce her husband, for one, or to change something about her life to appease to appease him, to keep him from leaving. She never regrets anything, and she never, for better or worse, apologizes for anything. I think there's a lot of choices she wouldn't have needed to apologize for. I think in terms of Little Edie, I think there are some things that maybe she should have made peace with Little Edie over, apologized for. But that there is something, I don't know about beautiful, good, admirable in the way she stands by how she chose to
her life.
Parent. Yeah, how she chose her life.
Yeah, and she actually gets probably the most summarizing line of the movie, where she's talking about the cat.
Cat's going to the bathroom, right in back of my portrait.
God, isn't that awful?
No, I'm glad he is. I'm glad somebody's doing something they want to do.
The Maysles capturing that on film is perfect, because it says so much. It says so much about Big Edie's mentality of I don't even care if what's happening is destructive. It's important that you do what you want to do. And that she lives that.
Yeah.
She doesn't care if you think
She
her life is destructive.
Did not care about what anybody thought.
She doesn't care about much at that point, it seems, except for her autonomy.
Yeah.
True. Yeah.
This is totally off subject, but do you know Jiminy Glick, Martin Short's character?
Yeah.
How much of his voice is based on Little Edie, do you think?
Probably a lot. I think Little Edie has filtered her way into many.
Probably. I just kept hearing, that was part of what, I don't know, that definitely affected my viewing, because it was either times where I was needing to think about something, because the movie was dragging or whatever, but there were just times where I was like, Martin Short is a very perfect impersonation of Little Edie doing Jiminy Glick.
So you got to wonder, if she was at the right age when things like The Surreal Life were coming out. And, if she would have had a whole career, kind of like a Tammy Faye Baker when she was alive, just as someone who is just who they are,
Celebrity Apprentice.
you know, a little unconventional, and they make a whole career out of, you know, appearances and, you know, reality television. But I did want to talk about, to get your feelings on this. And I don't even know that I need to necessarily mention where the discussion was taking place. And this came up with our American movie discussion too, about whether choosing these people as documentary subjects was exploitive of them, and if we are then nothing more than voyeurs when watching this. And I have a knee-jerk reaction to that where I just say no. I have my reasons why, but it does seem to be...
Your knee-jerk reaction to this movie or to that question in general?
Well, this movie, but also we kind of came to that conclusion in American movie where we didn't really feel like these people were being exploited. But I just wonder, I wonder why that always comes up when you have a documentary about people who are kind of weird or quirky, where I think, it comes back to the Rorschach thing. It says more about the viewer.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
And there's something kind of condescending about that, I think, where you're the one because you're so normal, or you think you have it together.
These people should be ashamed.
Either these people should be ashamed, or the director should be ashamed for putting them on display like this for us to laugh at.
Well, even if you don't think specifically they should be ashamed, you do think they should not be seen, you know, publicly.
Right.
This should not be put on display because it is a display. I think, like we said with American Movie, in different hands, or even made at a different time. Like if they were on reality TV,
right,
they would have been made a caricature.
Right, and I think it's very important. This movie in no way is a caricature.
No.
And I mean, this movie isn't even campy.
Yeah.
You know,
that's true.
It
Yeah,
really
it's
is
not at all.
not. People who would think that this movie is exploitive, you know, like we said, it's the test. Are looking at themselves in a negative light. And I don't think even someone who's truly honest with themselves or part of themselves can watch this movie and in no way can find it exploitive, because this movie is a love story between these two women and these two brothers making this movie.
I think
they celebrate these women.
That's a really good point. And because even in the interview I watched with Albert Maysles, he talked about really wanting to portray the mother-daughter relationship, which in his words was perhaps the most profound relationship possible. And yet it doesn't hardly ever get any attention in film and in
and two, I mean, certainly
media.
mother-daughter relationships, I imagine. And, you know, father-son, husband-wife, like, you know, relationships are very complicated and they're ugly, they're loving,
and each one is unique.
Exactly. And, you know, like I said before, like they're mother-daughter, but they're married, you know?
Right.
And there's all different kinds of marriages.
Yeah.
And, you know, they really celebrated that relationship.
Well, and I don't think it's coincidental that that first scene where she's talking about her outfit, she talks about the way that they perceive the brothers, where she says, "Mother says you're very conservative, and he's wearing light blue." That it's a brief thing, and you could possibly make too much of it, but right away they do set up that people are different and people see each other differently, and even brothers who have come together to make this movie have two very different sensibilities.
Right. You know, that's the thing is I remember, again, in that Albert Maysles interview, he also talked about like how they would do a day of shooting. And there were certain days where, you know, they would get some great stuff, but maybe only like an hour or two or whatever. And then like they would have some days where the four of them would say, in fact, little Edie would say, "Boy, that was a banner day."
Right.
Like they knew exactly what they were doing. And even little Edie afterwards, I believe, like really liked this documentary.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
well,
you know, but then the question was raised, and this is, I think, is maybe even more offensive. Are they in a correct mental state to make that decision? It was a conversation I was reading online, but it was from a pretty mainstream publication. And I don't like the position that puts an audience in when watching this, where we have to kind of make a diagnosis every time we watch a documentary about the mental state of the subjects based on their editing.
Right.
You know?
Right. The really interesting thing that it says about each viewer is that this movie, more than a lot of other documentaries or movies or books or art at all, really, not overtly, but vitally forces you to look at yourself. Because it pretty much questions everything about the way you look at people. If your proclivity is to feel guilt and all of a sudden you're projecting that on these people, they should feel guilty for acting the way they're acting, or I should feel guilty for watching this,
Right.
then you really need to examine that. If you're trying to say, okay, are these people faking it? Are they crazy? Are they delusional? You need to really look at, why do you feel the need to categorize people so wholly and so singly? And
it gets very conformist after a while. Like,
Yeah,
are we
yeah,
not allowed to show characters?
Well,
Not characters, but even people.
Well, are people allowed to be admirable and make bad choices, or are they allowed to be critical but also loving? Like, what amount of multiplicity are we allowing in people? What level of complexity? And I saw this, if you'll forgive me, and maybe this won't make sense, when I started working in special ed, people would like either say, "Oh, I could never do that," or "Oh, they're such angels," and I'm like, one, no, they're not.
Right. Yeah.
People with special needs can be real assholes. And also, there's nothing better about me than anybody else for working with them. I don't have this extreme level of patience. Two, these students don't require necessarily an angel to teach them. Like, they are people, and there's something a little bit different about them. Some days I'll laugh at them. Some days I'll get super mad at them. Some days I'll be elated with the way they're acting, but they are not always joyous, and they are not always frustrating and difficult. But people can't really wrap their heads around that.
But that should
I'm sorry for comparing the Beales to students with special needs.
But we're talking about people that we would maybe interpret as unconventional, whether it is because of some medical diagnosis or whether it's just because you have a quirky personality. Right. Yeah. I mean,
well, you hit on something really important for me just now, is that, and I think maybe this is why, I love the movie so much. But for me, I find in my movies that I love, the books I love, art, whatever, that the most beautiful thing to me is something that will shock me out of my complacency. And that's what this movie does to every single person who watches it. And every time I watch it, I'm shocked out of it.
I mean, maybe if you aren't shocked by it or unsettled by it, then you were probably living in that house.
Right. But I mean, that's, the people like you were talking in the article. And certainly, when they're talking about the people in the village of East Hampton.
Yeah.
You can get arrested for wearing red shoes on a Monday, she says, and her costumes would shock, because it's the conformity, because, their complacency, they want to hold on to it. And the critics and the people who watch the movie and who criticize it and make judgments and, assumptions, their complacency is pretty ironclad.
And I guess maybe what I really appreciate about the way the Maysles approached this project is it didn't become just some sort of vendetta about nonconformity.
Right.
It's a very nuanced look at it. It's like, here are two people who you can, without objectively say, are nonconformist.
Yeah.
They are living a life that is not within the society's norms the way you are supposed to live a life.
And not only society,
they are showing
in
that in its entirety. Like, here's some things that you can appreciate about that. Here's some things you can love about it. These people, we do genuinely love and care for them, like, in a very human sort of way. But
and all through
they've
the
got
Maysles
raccoons in their
movies.
wall.
Right,
Like, they've got raccoons.
They're feeding
their
the
raccoons.
And
like,
not
Buster.
only society in not only society in general, waspy,
Right.
Long Island, presidential.
Right.
That is the most conforming of conformist societies in America.
the closest thing we have to royalty, really.
Yeah,
Or aristocracy.
especially the Kennedys. And to be 80 years old and still dropping your bathing suit on camera.
Right.
Like, I
don't have any warts on me.
There is something definitely admirable, to say the least, about that.
I think to go along with sort of that beauty of imperfection that is that's shown so beautifully in the movie is my very favorite moment in the whole movie, and it catches me every time. And I almost stopped breathing, and I really did the first time I saw it even. Toward the end of the movie, they're in the bedroom, and they're just filming, and Big Edie's rattling on, and they're just filming Little Edie, and then she looks at them, and she says, I don't see myself as you see me, but you're very good at what you do see me as. And I think that's the movie. And I think that's us in every relationship, we have with people. And that moment of clarity, and she does have these moments of such wisdom and just normal clarity.
Yeah.
And then, she'll go on dancing and, but what do we look at when we look at each other? Like, we see imperfections, but why do we fall in love? We fall in love with the imperfect things about people. And that's what made me fall in love with these women.
Interesting.
Very well said. I think actually on that we could probably go ahead and kind of in the discussion here, and maybe I guess after discussing here and raising a lot of interesting points, like where are we at with this movie, or what as we've done in our last few episodes, me and Ryan at least, like what's our friendship looking like? Are we kind of seeing eye to eye on this, or are we kind of still
is our relationship still complicated?
Is it still strained? Yeah. And I for one am really glad that you were here for this.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, thank you for having
absolutely
me.
Absolutely.
Because I think even though I did like it a lot more the second time, even after just hearing you talk about it, I feel like I can go ahead and maybe even maybe not bump it up a lot, but
tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll have to rewatch it again. I don't know, but I think I'll probably still keep it at just that kind of 4-star rating. But I really do have a real appreciation for this movie.
I think only having seen it once, I'm still gonna have to keep it at 3.5. But it changed the way I saw this first time. That the things that unsettled me are a lot less murky to me now, and a lot less haunting. I think I'm not going to have that sort of haunting feeling as I carry the movie with me. I think I'm going to have a lot more to mull over and think about the way I see people and my students and my wife and my friends, and every relationship I think is going to look different now. Yeah. If that sounds hyperbolic, I'm sorry, but so it's going to be I'm going to keep it at a 3.5, but with certainty that I'm going to be seeing it again and seeing it differently that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as the discussion goes, we've all had kind of a very mutual understanding as far as the 3 levels we have of whether we're best buds,
right?
Whether we have a mutual understanding, or whether it's complicated. And I don't feel like we're leaving this in a complicated place. I feel like we're leaving this really feeling like we've each definitely learned something about a different thing we all got from this movie watching it.
I think I have
it's a movie that lends itself to that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think I have a couple dozen more viewings before I get to where Eric is. But I think Little and Big Edie would be fine with us having our own.
Definitely. I mean, in your introduction, you said something like, "Does it still carry through?" And I mean, it certainly does, because we're still talking about these women, and
absolutely.
They're, and I really think this is the Maysles masterpiece.
Do you? Okay.
I really do.
All right. But yeah, if any of our listeners, or if you out there listening have anything to say about Grey Gardens, or anything that we talked about with Grey Gardens, you love it, you hate it, you don't know how you feel about it, which is kind of how we're all at. But if you do, we'd love to hear from you. Make sure that you comment on our website, canwestillbefriends.net. You can always hit us up on all of the various social media
Twitter
outlets on there.
Facebook.
Out there. Yep.
That's it. We're not on Snapchat or
Google Plus, or what's the new
Tinder.
Hit us up on Tinder.
What do you think Little Edie's Twitter would be like?
Oh, geez.
Oh my goodness.
That's a good question. Maybe our listeners could respond back as Little Edie.
Could she keep herself to 140 characters?
Horoscopes, maybe linked to the horoscopes.
Possibly, yeah.
Anyways, we'd love to hear from you. You can also always give us a call and leave a voicemail if you'd like. Our phone number is 847-306-9532. We would love to hear from you.
Yeah.
So yeah, with that said, why don't we go ahead and talk about what we're going to be watching for our next episode?
Yeah, it's an odd choice, but for some reason, I'm excited to see it. I think this is going to be a fun episode.
For a lot of reasons, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're very happy and excited about is the recent FCC decision about net neutrality, which is something that we both care a lot about, and so we're trying to figure out, okay, what film could we do that really tackles the internet?
And we also like to celebrate anniversaries, and celebrating its anniversary this year, its 20th anniversary. One of the foundational internet movies, one of Sandra Bullock's star-making turns in 1995's The Net.
The Net.
And I remember, I think my dad got this from Blockbuster when it came out. I probably didn't really pay attention when it was on. Nate, you've never seen it?
I haven't seen it, but how much could have possibly changed with the internet in 20 years?
20 years, the internet probably hasn't changed a bit. So we're excited to see this movie. We haven't really done sort of like a thriller, just like a I don't know, this sort of movie before.
Right, like
Also,
a sort of popcorn thriller
And
type thing.
If it's been a movie we haven't seen, it's usually because we think it's important to see. Maybe with summer coming, we're feeling the need to have like a popcorn,
just relax,
and have fun watching a movie.
Yeah. So, anyways,
The Net. If you
can find it, we'd love for you to watch The Net with us.
Maybe it's on the Netflix.
Oh yeah, The Netflix. Anyways, we hope that you watch it with us, or if you remember The Net at all, we'd love to just hear your thoughts about The Net.
Yes.
And Sandra Bullock and just
whoever else is in it. Dennis Miller's in it, I believe.
Really?
I think so.
This is going to be fun. This is going to be a lot of fun. So, anyways, as always, we want to just thank you so much for listening to our podcast, and I do want to thank Eric for coming in and talking Grey Gardens with us. Thank you for coming in.
It
would have been a much lesser episode without you.
Absolutely. So, we'll catch you next time when we're discussing Sandra Bullock in The Net. See you later.